6-minute podcast. Business, study, life.
All right. So, we've been talking about these tricky interactions, the kind that leave you feeling kind of drained or like you're hitting a wall. And it seems like what you're really looking for are some practical ways to navigate those moments, when things get tough. Not necessarily getting bogged down in like the psychology of why people are difficult, but more like, okay, what can I actually do about it?
Yeah, totally. And the stuff you sent over really gets at that, like how to actually find solutions and better outcomes when communication gets a little challenging,
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at some concrete strategies and techniques, things you can actually use day to day that can help you feel more in control and just navigate those interactions better,
Okay, cool. So let's just jump right into some solutions then. One of the things that really struck me right off the bat was this idea of kind of reframing how we view quote unquote difficult behavior, right? Instead of just labeling someone as difficult, writing them off the material, suggests considering, maybe there are some underlying reasons behind what's going on. Maybe they're feeling insecure or unheard. And that little shift in how we see it, seems like a pretty powerful starting point.
It really is. And what's so interesting here is how that internal shift on our part can actually start to change the whole dynamic, right?
Yeah.
If we go in expecting someone to be difficult, we might be unconsciously putting up our defenses. But if we consider that maybe their behavior is coming from a place of needing connection, it can really soften our approach and make us more open to finding a constructive way to interact. It's kind of like putting on a different pair of glasses to understand what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that leads directly into how we respond or even choose not to respond. It's a good reminder that even if someone's, words or actions are unexpected, we always have a choice in how we react. I thought the suggestion of sometimes just saying less was really interesting. It's kind of counterintuitive, but the material points out that silence can project a sense of calm and confidence and even encourage the other person to kind of reconsider what they've said.
Definitely. In the heat of the moment, it's easy to just want to jump in and defend yourself or argue back. But that pause, that silence, it can be so powerful. It gives you a moment to collect yourself and avoid saying something you might regret. And it can also prompt the other person to kind of step back and reflect a little bit. And then building on that idea of taking control of our own responses, the material talks about setting these small, achievable goals for communication. It's not about, winning every argument or changing someone's mind completely, but maybe just focusing on trying to understand each other a little better, in that specific moment.
Yeah, and that takes the pressure off trying to achieve this huge breakthrough every single time, which realistically, rarely happens on the spot anyway. And before we even think about how we respond effectively, the material really emphasizes, being aware of our own emotions and practicing mindfulness, particularly focusing on our breath as a way to kind of ground ourselves in the moment.
Right. That's the foundation of everything.
Yeah.
It's so hard to choose a helpful response if you're caught up in your own emotional whirlwind.
Yeah.
So noticing your breath, like the material, suggests it's a really simple but effective way to create some space between, the stimulus and your reaction.
Yeah.
A little pause, even just a few seconds, can make all the difference in responding thoughtfully instead of just reacting.
Okay, so let's get into some specific, sticky situations and how to handle them.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, what about when someone says, nobody ever listens to me? The natural reaction might be to get defensive, but the approach they suggest is so smart, using clarifying questions. Asking something like, I never listen. Can you tell me more about when you feel that way? It immediately shifts the focus from, this broad accusation to a more specific exploration of their experience.
Exactly. Instead of getting into a back and forth about whether you always or never do something, you're inviting them to give you some concrete examples. And that can often help de-escalate things right there just by requiring them to articulate their feelings more clearly. It's about moving from these vague generalities to specifics where you can actually start to find a solution.
Right.